Hello, everybody. Welcome to this lecture on the philosophy of perception, one topic in the philosophy of mind. This week, material will be a little bit shorter, and then you'll have your final quiz due by the end of the class over the next couple weeks. Next week, we'll be discussing a little bit in the philosophy of language, just to wrap up the class. I hope you enjoy this lecture, and I hope you've enjoyed the class up to this point. So this is a little bit more fun, but still some interesting philosophy. So let's get started. So first, philosophy of perception. When talking about the philosophy of mind, we're not just concerned with issues that have to do with things like consciousness and subjective qualitative experiences, as you might have gotten the idea from the last lecture. There's also a lot in the philosophy of mind that is concerned with our relationship to the world, that tries to explain how it is that our minds can possibly provide us with information about the world. That is, how our minds and the world are related in ways that don't really have anything to do with what's going on when it comes to experiencing the world. Right. So part of what allows us to obtain information about the world that's around us is our faculty of perception. That is, our ability to perceive the properties of objects that are in the world. And it's an interesting question then, just how perception works. Now, we all know about the five senses that everyone has, right? So there's vision, taste, smell, hearing, and touch. There may be some other ones, right? People suggest that like proprioception, like bodily awareness is a kind of sense that you have, but it's not one of the sort of the main five that are the most obvious. But sensation, the sort of experience that you have of feeling things, seeing things, hearing things, smelling things, touching things, is different than perception itself. So sensation is the phenomena, basically, of the relationship between the sense organ itself and the stimuli in the world, right? So the pattern of light that hits the eyes, the sort of object in the world that hits the haptic sensors in your fingers when you touch something, right? In your ears, it's the sort of pattern of reverberations in the airwaves that hits your eardrum. Right, in your nose, there's a complex set of chemical reactors, basically, that these olfactory receptors that, like, when a certain thing hits them, it causes a little reaction, right? But that's that's like a sensation. That's what the senses do. The sense organs react and respond in certain ways, but that's different from perception itself. Perception is the recognition in the sort of mental system in our minds of a property that's had by something in our environment, in our the environment that surrounds us, which is caused by a process that begins with sensation and basically ends with the kind of proto judgment that whatever thing it is that we are perceiving or sensing in this case has the particular property that we think that it seems to have, right? So you look at a door, and the door is painted red, and basically, there's something that happens where the light reflects off the door in a specific wavelength, and that hits certain receptors, the rods and cones in your eye, and that creates an electrical signal that travels up from your eye to your brain, causing you a bunch of things to happen in your brain, which allows you to make a quick judgment that the door is red. And in a sense, it's like you can think about what you're seeing, but the fact that like, to make the explicit judgment, but you come to believe basically that the door is red instantaneously upon seeing it, right? Similarly with hearing things, right? There's your ears are involved in the sense of hearing, but it's like once once that sense is triggered, you can just hear that there's a car driving by, or you can feel that a cat's fur is very soft, etc. Um, so how does perception work, though, right? What exactly is the relationship between our minds and the world when it comes to perceiving the world? Well, there's a bit of debate, and at the very least, I'm just going to discuss two views here, the sort of two major views. There are more, but these are the two major views that get bandied about. And the sort of first one, the sort of most obvious one, the one that a lot of people think is correct, is this view that we might call naive realism. And naive realism is basically that perception is a relation between a perceiver and the world, right? That's just what perception is. It's just to perceive something is for you to stand as a perceiver in some relation, a particular relation to or the relation of perception to the object, right? And then the idea is that look, there's just objects out there in the world, right? There's rocks and trees and water and people, and those things have properties, right? Like being such and such a shape, being such and such a color, being such and such a size, being such and such a consistency. And you are just in contact with those things, with those properties. And perception is basically just the way in which you pick up on those properties, right? So there's a rock over there, and it's the size of a watermelon. And the way that you know that is because you see that it is about the size of a watermelon. And that's just a property of the rock, and you're just in a special relationship, a special relation to that rock, the relation of seeing it, right? Now, this view has some interesting pros and cons. So the naive realist theory just says, right, that what you see is what you get, right? You just there's properties out there in the world, and you are the perceiver, and you're just picking up on those properties that are out there in the world. The world is just made up of those properties and the objects that you see, and sort of it's what you see is what you get, right? The world is really out there doing all of the regular stuff that we think it's doing, right? And one of the good things about this view is that it helps us to explain why we perceive what we perceive, right? Like, why is it that we see the rock as that particular size and shape? Well, because the rock is that particular size and shape. Why do we see the door as red? Well, because the door is red, right? That's just what it is for these things to be out there in the world. When you perceive something, you end up coming to have a good justified belief about how the thing in the world actually is. However, there is a con to the naive realist view, and it kind of proliferates, but we're going to look at one specific example. And that example is the example of color. Sometimes naive realism seems to get certain things wrong. So let's look into the case of color itself. So here's a problem for the naive realist theory, right? If you've probably thought about this before, what the heck is color anyway? Right? Like, is color real? Is it something that's out there in the world? There are reasons you might think not, right? So here's some ways of thinking about it. Humans are what are called trichromats. We have three different kinds of, I think they're cones in the eyes, which allows us to see the three primary colors, right? Red, yellow, and blue. And then that's why, in a way, there are, the way we see the world is in these different blends of these three different primary colors, right? If you've ever gone, I don't know, on like a painting, program, you go pick all these different colors, and they give you this big circle that gives you sort of the big blends of all the different colors. And basically, each of those things is just a blend of red, blue, and yellow in some way. However, humans, while they're trichromats, there are other kinds of creatures that are out there that have different ways of seeing and sensing color, right? There's dogs. So dogs are dichromats. They don't have three kinds of cones in their eyes. They only have two kinds of cones in their eyes. Dogs basically can only see yellow and blue. It's a common misconception that dogs see in black and white. They don't see in black and white, but they do see in like a kind of, I don't know, sepia almost way of thinking about things. It's just different. It looks very different. You can see it online if you look it up. But yeah, they only see in yellow and blue, shades of yellow and blue. That's basically the spectrum on which dogs can see. And then there are other kinds of creatures that are able to see in even like more complicated ways. They have a whole other sets of cones in their eyes that allow them to sort of differentiate between colors that humans can't even differentiate between. So it's an interesting question. Is color really what we see there out in the world? Or is color something about how we see what's going on in the world. I mean, like, think about it. If you were to look at like, I don't know, an apple, let's say, and a creature that has more, say, some alien was to look at the same apple, and that creature had more cones in its eyes and could see sort of more colors on the apple. Who would be right, right? You or the alien in describing the color of the apple? Basically, is it a fact of the matter that the apple is the particular color that you see? Or is it that color exists sort of in the way in which you see the thing, right? It's the color doesn't come into existence. It's not right out there in the thing itself. It sort of comes into existence because you are interacting with the apple, and your response mechanisms in your eyes are causing it to seem as if it's a certain color in a certain way. So there's this interesting question: what exactly is color? Is color something that's out in the world that's part of the objects that seem to be colored, or is color part of how it is that we perceive the world? Well, there's another popular theory of perception, and it's one that's widely accepted, and it's called representationalism, or sometimes intentionalism. Now, representationalism is the view that perception is a relation between a perceiver and the world, but the relation is mediated by a particular special thing called a perceptual representation. And the perceptual representation is a creation of the perceiver's perceptual system. You can kind of think about it as like an image. I mean, that's, it's this is a bad metaphor, but it's helpful. Think of it as an image. Imagine basically like that things work like this. Um, your perceptual system works like a little machine. Light hits off objects out in the world. The light reflects into the perceptual, the sensation system, your eyes, and that system then gets triggered, and it starts manufacturing basically this little like image of what the interpretation of the light pattern gives you. Right, so the light hits your eyes start to interpret like what's being seen. They send patterns of recognition to your brain fully interprets all that and then outputs your perceptual representation, and then that is what you basically are able to, in a sense, uh, think about, see in your mind's eye. So here's a picture of representational realism, right? We start off with the simulation of the object, and then that sort of triggers the sense organ. We get the sensory data, and then the faculty of our representational system constructs the image that we consciously see as perceivers. This is the view of representational realism. The difference here between representational realism and naive realism is that on the representational realist side, there are these things called perceptual representations. On the naive realist side, we don't really have this intermediary thing when we perceive something. That something might be going on in our minds that might be, resemble a representation in some sense, but that's not what it is to see something. It doesn't, on the naive view, it doesn't matter whether or not we actually have this in between intermediate object or mental event. So it's interesting and worth kind of thinking about, right? What's your initial thought? Is naive realism true? Is that just that, when you see something, it's just what you see is what you get? Or is representational realism true? Is it sort of a better view of perception and how the mind works? And one reason you might think at this point, sort of why representational realism is a little bit better, is because it helps to explain the issue of color, right? The idea being that color doesn't really exist sort of out there in the world. What color is it's the way that our mind or our perceptual system interprets the light waves that hit our eyes, when they are responding to the three kinds of cones that we have, right? The red, yellow, and blue cones. Those things trigger, and then our mind constructs this perceptual sort of image, and that perceptual representation is kind of how we see the world. And then the idea is that really those colors aren't out there. What's out there is, there's surfaces to objects, and then wavelengths that those surfaces cause light reflectance to, bounce towards us and hit our eyeballs. And that's what's really out there in the world. But there's no color out there in the world. Color is just something that we construct in our perceptual systems, and that is like how we see the world. And so that view is supposed to be, at least in some sense, better than the naive realist view, because the naive realist view has to say something like, well, look, no, there just are these colors out there in the world, and what you see is what you get, right? If you see that the hat is blue, then the blueness is there in the hat. But then, they come into this problem. Well, like, what about, okay, so take the red door. Dogs can't see red. So is the door red in the, when it comes to a dog? Like, a dog can't even see that. And what about other creatures that can see more colors? If they see something that is, more colorful than the way that humans can see it, who's to say that they're wrong and we're right when it comes to talking about color? Here's some further reasons for thinking that representational realism, or sort of, representationalism, is actually the correct view, right? And the idea here, again, representationalism, the difference between representational realism and naive realism is this thing that exists in between, right? There, when it comes to perception, there's a relationship between an object out in the world, a perceptual representation that is constructed by our perceptual systems, and then us, the perceiver, perceiving the thing, right? It's like the way by which we see the things in the world is by means of this thing that is constructed by our perceptual systems. And one reason for thinking that this view is even more correct is the existence of illusions and hallucinations. So illusions and hallucinations are commonly thought of as basically a kind of perceptual phenomena, right? They're the kinds of things that occur in the perceptual system when the perceptual system malfunctions in a specific way, right? So suppose you hit your head, or you take some drugs, or you don't get enough sleep for a few days, right? Your perceptual system is going to misfire in certain ways that will cause you to come to see certain things that really kind of aren't there, right? The idea is you don't really see it, right? Like the pink elephant that's in the room after you've taken some hallucinatory drugs. You don't see the actual elephant. You seem to see it, but really what's going on there is the drugs have affected your perceptual system in such a way that this thing has sort of come to happen, right? And it seems like you're seeing it, but really what's going on here is the perceptual representation has been sort of altered. Your perceptual system itself has been messed with by these, perception altering drugs. And that's why it seems to you that you're seeing something that's not actually there. Hallucinations, if they are part of or products of our perceptual system, seem to incline us towards representational realism, right? So the idea here is like the naive realist view can't accommodate for the idea of for what's going on in hallucinations and illusions, because it doesn't have this explanatory feature, this sort of intermediate thing that exists between the objects out in the world and us as perceivers, being the perceptual representation that sort of is constructed by our perceptual system. Hallucinations on one side, though, actually illusions are the even bigger reason for believing in perceptual representations, and thereby for accepting representational realism instead of naive realism. So here's a few fun examples. So here is this sort of dancing woman, or the spinning woman. And if you look at it, you might see her spinning to the left, or you might see her spinning to the right. It sort of actually depends on how your visual perceptual field is cued. It is actually also possible in some sense to see it flip from one direction to the other. It's a little bit difficult, but if you kind of focus, you can actually start to see it. In one sense, at one point it looks like her leg is facing you, or it's coming towards you, and in the other it's going away from you in different cases. The interesting thing here, right, is depending on whether or not you see it going one way or the other, the thought here is that this is, in a sense, it's an illusion, right? It's just an image on a screen. There is no real spinning one way or the other here at all. And what sort of gives you the illusion of the spinning, what gives you the sort of feeling that there's some spinning going on, both in either direction, is your perceptual system. Your perceptual system is tuned to construct this perceptual representation that kind of works along those lines. And because you evolved to see people spinning, and so this shape going one way or going the other way, it creates that perception in your mind. Here's another example, right? So this is a famous example called the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Mueller-Lyer illusion. It tends to look to pretty much everyone that the top line is shorter than the middle line, right? However, these lines are precisely the same length, all three of them, right? And the issue here is it's really hard to just to think that the top line isn't shorter in some way. The issue actually here has to do with how our perceptual systems evolved. Our perceptual systems evolved so that when we see corners, we think of lines as a little bit shorter, because it actually has to do with how corners work when it comes to being inside of rooms. And when corners fade out, in the second line here, that usually tends to mean that the lines are longer or further away in certain ways. So there's actually an explanation. I don't want to go into too many details here as to why the top line looks shorter than the middle line. However, this illusion, basically, the thought is, if naive realism was true and you looked at the line, you'd see how long it was, right? But really, the thought for the naive, for the representational realist is, look, no, there's the line out there in the world, but the line's length is an interpretation in some way that is caused when it comes to our perceptual system responding to that line. So the line, there's light that reflects off the line, it hits our eyeballs, our brain then starts churning and creates a perceptual representation that makes it seem like the top line is shorter than the middle line, even though the lines are actually the same length. And there are evolutionary reasons for this, but that is neither here nor there at the moment. The issue here, or the question, just is does this give some sort of reason to accept one of the perceptual systems or perceptual theories over another? And it seems like it does. Finally, here's one of the more interesting and exciting ones, at least for, I like this. So it seems like little a and b here, a square and b square, are different colors, right? It seems obvious that they're different colors because, b is in the shadow, but clearly it looks white, just like the other diagonal squares near it, and a looks gray, right, like the other diagonal squares near it. However, that's actually wrong. Oddly enough, A and B are actually the exact same color in this image, because there's an illusion going on. And the illusion that's going on basically is that when you see something that seems like it's in a shadow, your brain kind of responds, right? Your eyes see that the thing is in a shadow, and they give you information that changes how you actually perceive particular things. When your mind thinks that something's in shadow, then it thinks of that thing as a lighter color than it actually is. So here you've got sort of more obvious example where A and B really are, it shows you that they are actually the same color all the way through, and it's sort of off-putting once you see that. But yeah, A and B are exactly the same color, and the reason that we see them differently is because we're used to seeing things in shadow, and we're used to sort of automatically, of course, what we see is kind of automatically changed for us So what we think is automatically changed for us. However, here in this particular case, A and B are exactly the same color. Here's another case that's even, that's also sort of difficult to see right off the bat. A and B in this case are also the same color, which is a wild fact. But the idea here is, we evolved to see things with the sun, coming from above. And so it causes shadows to happen in certain ways, and that causes particular shades to change and differ. But, this is a computer screen. And so now really, like, you're seeing like very specific actual colors that are a certain way. But on this view, yeah, like A and B are one particular color. And now sort of like given this little block in between, now you can sort of see that they actually are the same color, right? They're really like similar, and they are the same color given the illusion. But it's that part in the middle that creates the illusion for you, right? Like slowly it goes away, and wow, okay, there you go. They actually are the same color, and the sort of issue here is, right, like now you can see that they're the same color. Before you couldn't see that they were the same color. Why? What's the difference? Well, it's because without sort of adding this like intermediate block, your brain is automatically doing these calculations and causing you to see these things in an eluded way, because it's constructing, or the thought is, at least on the representational realist side, it's constructing a perceptual representation for you to see, right? Because it's interpreting how the world is out there, not just picking up on how the world is out there. It's interpreting how the world is and then feeding you information based on its interpretation. So representational realism says that our minds or brains sort of interpret the data our sensory organs pick up and construct representations out of that data. And so how the representation is constructed, in a sense, it always depends on a long history of evolution and evolutionary input as human perception has developed over time. And these illusions are basically the results of tricks that the perceptual system has kind of learned over time for representing things accurately most of the time, right? When it comes to the real world, shadows really do exist, right? Shadows don't exist on computer screens. That's kind of the joke here, right? There aren't really any shadows, but because you're looking at something that is attempting to represent a shadow, this is just how this works. In the real world outside, when there are real shadows, you generally don't fall into illusions of this sort, right? Because things actually are different colors. If this was an actual block, right, you would be correct in thinking that A is darker in color than B, right? Because A clearly would be gray and B would be white. But on the computer screen, that's not how it is. So if you can now pause this video and look at the other videos that I've posted here below, particular the videos on the Ames room that discuss forced perspective, and the video on the McGurk effect, which I think is the most interesting of these kinds of illusions, and that discusses cognitive penetration. Once you've watched those videos, come back here pause now and we'll come back, and I'll discuss them momentarily. So now the Ames room, so hopefully you've watched them and now you're back. The Ames room, right, forced perspective, there's from where you're standing, you have to, from where you're standing, you see the room and it looks as if it's a normal room, but in fact, it's not a normal room, right? If you were to move from one side to the other, you'd see that it's definitely not a normal room, but it's set up in such a way to cause you an illusion from the particular perspective, right? It makes it seem as if the guy is getting smaller when really he's just getting further away in a room that is set up to be larger at one end than another. And that basically, because normally rooms work in a specific way, your brain has come to interpret that. And so, when you see things that look this way, your brain interprets the room as square. That just so happens to be very wrong in this case. And the McGurk effect, I think, is like one of the most interesting ones, right? So with respect to the BAs and the FAs, right, your brain is actually, so there's an intermodal explanation here. Your ears and your eyes are connected in certain ways. And when you see things and hear things at the same time, some of the information basically can get reoriented. So when you see someone say something and you hear them say it, your eyes, in a sense, take precedence. If you saw them move their mouth in a particular way and heard a particular sound, your eyes will like, will, your brain really, but from the information from your eyes sort of takes dominance over the information from your ears and causes you to actually hear a different sound, which if that isn't off-putting to you, it's definitely off-putting to me. I watched that video a ton of times, and you close your eyes when he changes, right? From one sound to the other, and you can hear the correct sound, but then as soon as you open your eyes, it just changes right back. It's absolutely bonkers. So we've come to the end here. So is representational realism is it just a slam dunk? Like naive realism's out, and representational realism's like clearly true because we've got to have these things, these intermediary representational perceptual representations that exist because they're the constructions of our perceptual systems and they're the things that we actually see. No, right? This view isn't a slam dunk true, and a lot of people actually continue to argue against it today. So some naive realists deny that what's going on in cases of illusion and hallucination are actually genuine cases of perception. They say that these cases are outliers, and so they can't really properly be captured by a theory of perception. And so they don't want to deny that the brain or mind constructs representations. They just don't think that the representations are really part of what it is to perceive an object or property. They want to say that these are just sort of extra things that exist in your brain, but that's not what it is, not part of what it is to see, a rock or a door or a dog or something like that. So, what is perception, right? Anyway, and have you been swayed in one direction or another, right? Do you think representational realism is true, or do you see it itself as having, a lot of problems as a theory of philosophy? And I don't know, what have you to say? All right, have a great rest of your week.